You are listening
You are listening
You're listening to
to Not
to Not Elsewhere.
Not Elsewhere.
Elsewhere
Classified.
Everybody, welcome to the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast. On today's podcast, I have Sean Weiss. Sean Weiss is the host of the Compliance Guy podcast. He also hosts another podcast called Coffee, Compliance, and Chuckleheads. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. Please make sure that you follow the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast on your major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also please check out our YouTube channel, the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast. You can check out the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast on social media, including Facebook and Instagram. You can check out our Facebook groups. Everything will be linked in the comments, but you can go to medicalcodinggeek.com/services to sponsor a video or audio to promote your business or brand. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can also check out the CEU hit list, where it offers free CEUs for AAPC and AHIMA. That's been very popular. I just released the newest list for October not too long ago. And also, you could check me out. My name is Brian Cui. My last name is spelled C-U-I on LinkedIn. So on today's podcast, Sean Weiss shares his journey in healthcare, from wanting to start in medicine, pre-med, but found his way into business, into healthcare business, into coding. He talks about how the CPC at that time was the most difficult test he's ever taken. And then from there, he moved into compliance. So you'll hear how he navigated through his career and then finally led him to his passion in healthcare regulatory compliance. And I think at the end, we get into discussing his podcast, The Compliance Guy. And I think the most important question that I ask him is, where did the hat come from? Because that's how I was connected through Sean, was finding this gentleman with a hat on doing a podcast talking about healthcare regulatory compliance. So without further ado, this is part 1 of 2 of my interview with Sean Weiss. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome to the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast. As you notice, I have a hat on because I have here today on the podcast Sean Weiss, aka the Compliance Guy. How are you, Sean?
I am fantastic, Brian. How are you? And thank you for making me feel at home.
We were just talking. You just flew into Central Florida, and you're literally like 15 minutes away. I could have driven to you, and we'd have had a in-person podcast, but I know you just landed and you're hungry, you're waiting for your food, so I'm sure during the recording of this podcast you'll get a room service.
Yeah, well, there's no room service unfortunately with the pandemic, so it's an Uber Eats night.
Okay. What kind of food are you getting from Uber Eats around this area?
I had to go with my favorite, man. I am like an Asian food junkie.
Okay.
Tonight's a little sesame chicken,
okay,
some fried rice,
Yep.
some egg rolls,
Yep.
some wonton soup. That's my stuff, man. That's my jam when I can get good Chinese food.
Very good. Good choice.
As long as it's not Panda Express, I'm all right.
No. But it is good on occasion, I guess. Just in certain. It depends on what the
certain times of the night on certain nights.
There you go. What it calls for, but I know Orlando is great for
Yes.
Asian food. But I think where you're at, it's probably gonna be like another 30-40 minutes away from you if you want to really get some good Asian food. Anyways. How did I connect with Sean Weiss? I was just explaining it to him, and I was trying to figure it out before we started this podcast. And I've had on the podcast compliance-related professionals, and I've had Sonal Patel from the Paint the Medical Picture podcast. I've had Jordan Johnson on the podcast as well. Great guy. And I think because I had linked up with them, the way the algorithm for LinkedIn the way it works is anytime they like somebody's post, it comes on my feed. And what had happened is that I guess I see this in the feed, a guy with a hat and a microphone doing a podcast, compliance, aka compliance guy. And I'm like, wait a second, that's pretty cool. And then I'm like, so that's how we connected on LinkedIn, just making a connection. And then from there, I got reached out by the National Society of Certified Healthcare Business Consultants, and they wanted to send some guests over. And the first guest was you. I'm like, wait a second, you're sending me Sean Weiss? Of course I know Sean Weiss, aka the compliance guy. So this is where we're at today. So again, thank you for being on the podcast. I know I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions, of course, where you came from, and of course your podcast. The one thing that pops out of the podcast is the fact that you have it on 80 platforms. So we'll definitely get into that. That to me, I'm just probably a selfish question, like how did you get it to 80 platforms? I only have it about to just the major ones, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I'm like, what are the other, 70 plus platforms that are out there? And you're doing great numbers that I've noticed in just about 5 months. So I'm sure other podcasters that have started as a result of them being on as a guest here would definitely be interested in that. All right, so let's jump to the first question, because I know your food is probably on its way. First question, Sean. Where did you come from and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's really interesting. 27 years ago, you said to me, you're going to be working in regulatory compliance in healthcare, and you're going to be doing a podcast and auditing medical records and writing policies for different agencies and stuff like that. I'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm the kid who, was more focused in high school and in college about playing sports and doing all the fun things, not sitting down and reading and studying. And, I was pre-med, and I started hearing these things about something called discount fee for service. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean discount fee for service? I'm about to go through medical school, spend the better part of my life, learning anatomy, physiology, chemistry, microbiology, getting into, studying, the art of medicine, learning scientific methodologies, things like that. And, now you're telling me that, the 80s Mercedes are gone and I'm going to be getting paid based on something called an RVS. I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to find something else to do. And I remember calling my grandfather and my grandmother because they're the ones who raised me. And I said, I think I'm going to be leaving med and going into business. And I just remember hearing a click on the other end. But you know what? I look back over 26 years that I've been in healthcare and doing the things that I've had the privilege to be able to do. And it really has been a privilege. And I will tell you, I don't think I would change one single solitary thing. Some people say, if you had it to do over again, would you have stuck with medicine? Knowing what I know now, and the passion that I have for humanity and for caring for people, yeah, I think, I would have tried to be a little bit more mature in my decision. But, I don't have one single solitary regret about what I do. I started off in this industry, as I said, 26 years ago, working, answering the telephones, scheduling appointments. Back then, wow. When I started, I actually got started in high school. In 1989, I joined a program called HOSA, Health Occupations of America.
Ah, okay. Yep.
And I got a chance to do ride-alongs in ambulances and, work in the emergency room and get to, work in, what they used to call the theaters. Most people call them the operating rooms. And it was just an amazing time. And back then, I got hired on to this multi-specialty group. And I was answering telephones. We didn't have computers back then. We had paper scheduling books.
Yep.
And I know for some of your younger audience, I'm probably blowing their mind and they're like, oh my God, how ancient is this guy?
Yeah, that's right.
But that's how we did it back then. We scheduled people in a book. We made phone calls the night before to remind them. We didn't have electronic medical records. We had paper records. But yeah, and in 1997, I took my very first certification that was required from my employer, and it was the CPC.
Oh wow!
And I tell people all the time, that was the hardest thing I had ever done in my entire life. It was ridiculous. It was. I studied for a year before I took that test because it wasn't what it is right now. The test has adapted to change over the last couple of decades, and for better or worse, it is what it is. But that was honest to God the most brutal thing I've ever done, and I just I started getting more interested in the practice management aspect of it, and I took the Certified Medical Practice Executive, the CMPE, through MGMA, which was another nightmare. And then from there, I just, I started really kicking into gear with regulatory compliance, health law. And that's sort of the trajectory that my career went on. A lot of times I was in the right place at the right time. Knew the right people who were looking for somebody to take on a new challenge. And I think that was the thing for me that I never shied away from, was a challenge. I may not have had a clue as to what somebody was talking about, but I was willing to learn. I was willing to study. I was willing to put in the time. And, I think, those early years of buckling down helped me to understand the kind of discipline that you have to have in this industry to be successful.
Yeah. So let me ask this question. How did you, why was the CPC your first credential? How did you kind of stumble upon that?
Yeah, great question. So I was working for Tenet Health Systems in 1997, and I was a senior analyst working in the central billing office of the MSO, the Management Service Organization. And I was doing some really fascinating stuff, and I was supporting the leadership in the MSO on understanding claims denials, data management.
In 97? Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy because, what my very first consulting job in this industry was working for a company called the Medical Management Institute based out of Alpharetta, Georgia. Awesome outfit. They, sold years later, but I did a job. I did a consulting project through that company for Tenet and hit it off with the CEO and members of the MSO at that point. And they were, they offered me an opportunity to kind of expand. And I was like, well, this sounds really cool. And it was a great experience because, they were really big with the data. And I got to move into a compliance officer position for the MSO, and I became a liaison between the MSO and the physicians in the region. And part of the condition of me moving into a higher level position was I had to take this test called the Certified Professional Coder. And I was like, I didn't even know what it was. And I was like, all right, yeah, cool, no worries. And then I got these manuals because back then they didn't have boot camps.
Right.
I'm really dating myself now. I didn't have people that I could reach out to because nobody knew what the CPC was. It was a handful of people. And I wound up studying for a ridiculous amount of time. And I took this test and I was like paralyzed with fear. I mean, I was like, oh my God, I'm just hoping for a 70.
just a pass.
Nobody's gonna know what my actual score was. So let me just get a 70.
You're not gonna get a medal if you pass, if you get 100.
No, but what they told me the day before, I'll never forget. The day before, the CEO of the region called me and he said, hey, want to wish you luck on your test tomorrow. And just to let you know, if you don't pass, you're going to be finding another job. And I was like, holy crap, are you kidding me? So yeah, it was tough.
That's
but
a nice pep talk right there.
It was best pep talk of my professional career. Nothing is a better motivator than fear.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I passed that. And I don't know, from there, I just was like, okay, what else is out there? So, back then they had the CPC-P, which was for the payer side.
Mm-hmm.
I think they changed that credential to like the COC or something like that at a later date. And then I moved on from there and, studied for the CPMA, the Certified Professional Medical Auditor. And then along the way, I took credentials with Practice Management Institute out of Texas. I think I took like 5 or 6 of there. So I don't know. Somehow I wound up with like 10 certifications after my name. And it's like, I don't even list them on anything at this point right now.
Yeah.
But I will say this.
Yeah.
I spend the vast majority of my time in federal court, both in civil cases and in criminal cases. And even beyond a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, these certifications have significant impact.
Right.
When you're being introduced by a prosecutor from the Department of Justice, or if you're working on the defense side and defense counsel is qualifying you as an expert, and you watch the facial expressions of the jury, or if it's a bench case and you're watching the facial expression of the judge, they go through and they introduce each one of these 10 credentials and they give an explanation of what it is. And all of a sudden, you are this expert, right? Like my wife looks at me sometimes and she's like, I just don't get it.
My wife does the same thing too.
And I mean, I've been married for more than 2 decades to the most amazing woman. She's a first responder. She's a nurse. Nice. She's a practice administrator. Yeah. A lot of stuff in common. We're both coding geeks.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I think anybody who is a young and aspiring healthcare professional, or even somebody who has been doing this for a good period of time, who's looking for more self-satisfaction, more gratification out of their job, I will tell you, I'm a good old boy from South Georgia, right? Hard work, studying, perfecting your craft, being as close to a perfectionist as you can with what you do, there's nothing you can't accomplish. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, after 26 years, I hope that my legacy that I can leave behind for the next generation coming forward is that, they go, this is a guy who worked really hard, who was a grinder. When he wasn't grinding, he was working. When he wasn't working, he was grinding. And, I hope that I can be what people refer to as a trusted source. Like for me, you mentioned names, Jordan Johnson. Mm-hmm. I love Jordan. He's one of my favorite chuckleheads. This guy is a data guru. He's a master at his craft.
That's the reason why I had him on the podcast. Yep.
Yeah. Sanal Patel. Mm-hmm. she's the class of the coders, man. Not to say others aren't, but I know Sanal. I know what she stands for. I know the hard work that she puts out. I know how incredible she is as a coding professional, as an auditor, as a medical professional. Terry Fletcher is another one who's just absolutely sensational. So, I look for people who are wildly successful in their craft, and I try to emulate that. And I always look for inspiration. Somebody like yourself, I didn't really know who you were until just when we got a chance to speak the other day. But I've watched your podcasts. I've listened to multiple podcasts. I listen to the content that you put out, and you're an inspiration for me, right? Because you know your stuff, and that's what's so important. And that's the point that I guess I could have probably said this in two seconds, but like my wife is like, God, you could talk about a rock for an hour.
Yeah.
But if you find passion in something and you do it because you have a love for what you do, and it's not about the money, you'll succeed. You'll be the best at what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. When I started Medical Coding Geek, it wasn't because I wanted to start a business. It was the same thing. You had a passion. You wanted to, like you said, you could talk about a rock for about 2 hours. I could do the same thing, and I could, the thing is that when people ask me to speak at events, I'm asking them, well, how much time do you need? And somebody told me 30 minutes. I'm like, that's it. I just get started when you tell me 30 minutes. And so I tell them, maybe I could do 2 hours. Like, oh, that's too much. But I'm just getting started after the first hour. Like, you're kidding me, right? And I think just the passion of just what you've done, the same thing, like what I've done, is you need to let people know. And initially at first, it was like, okay, am I a trusted source, or I'm just one to I have a lot to say and I want people to listen. And I think that's the reason why I created this podcast, on top of just letting my thoughts out, but at the same time to meet people like yourself. I think what's very important with networking, especially with young professionals, is just doing that. And what's intriguing with your story so far is you've started in one area, medicine, and I see you got into business. Was it just straight business administration? Everybody, if you are enjoying the podcast so far, please consider liking this video and also subscribing to the Not Elsewhere Classified Podcast YouTube channel so you can be notified for future videos. Also, please check out the Medical Coding Geek YouTube channel, where I also post videos on the medical coding, CDI, and HIM community. Also, check out medicalcodinggeek.com, where we offer a lot of services, including our Facebook groups. You can go to medicalcodinggeek.com/services. Check out our Facebook groups, including Medical Coding Geeks, the RHIT and RHIA exam support group, the CDI network. We have a marketplace where you can sell and buy your books. We also have the CEU hit list. If you're interested in free CEUs, I release a monthly list of free CEUs that I find on the internet. Also, you could follow us on social media. Not Also Classified. Everything is at NEC Podcast. For Medical Coding Geek, it's at MED Coding Geek. You could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and we are also on TikTok. If you are listening to this episode, please make sure to subscribe and rate our show on Apple Podcasts. All the ratings and the reviews help our show get noticed. Also, I wanted to take a moment to promote our partners. You could check them out at medicalcodinggeek.com/partners. They include the Haugen Consulting Group, RadRx, Project Resume, Renowned Talent, and so much more. And of course, you could find me, Brian Cui. My last name is spelled CUI on LinkedIn. So without further ado, let's return back to the show.
Yeah, it was business administration, but I always knew that I wanted to do something in healthcare.
Right.
Really since high school. And so my concentration was business administration with an emphasis in healthcare management.
Okay. Okay. So like a health services administration
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
type of thing. And you've leveraged, to me, that's a great degree, because I did a video on my other channel, Medical Coding Geek, on transferable skills. And you mentioned certifications, and there's always talk about, do I need a master's? Like I'm always asking myself, do I need a master's? And the last guest that I had got her doctorates, but her pathway was different, that it required the same thing for you. You need to get your CPC or you're fired. She was in an academia arena, and she stepped in with a bunch of doctorates, people with doctorates. So she has to step herself up. So the idea is, I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, the degree doesn't matter, is what your education, what you compile with your education, your certifications. And what people don't, what I want people to realize is that, don't just look at the certification in itself. Look at the components of the certifications that got you there. Like you say, you took a year. I'm sure a whole entire year. That's what I wanted to ask. Also, what did you learn within that year? What are some of the takeaways from that year that helped, made you the compliance guy, And so what I want people to realize is that even though you have a certification or certifications, or not even a master's, you could take one aspect of it. Because one thing that I did on a video is I analyzed the master's program, and it had 11 courses. And one of them was data analytics. Okay, you could run with just that, and go on that direction. Another one was privacy and security. Shoot, you could just take that one course and run with that. Another one was project management. Man, you know how many, if you could just take that one course and get certified as a project manager, you could run in that direction as well. So those are some of the things that you can do. And it's not just, certify. I think the key word that I've got out of that was transferable skills.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, here's one of the things that I've recognized in our industry. And I'm talking about the coding, billing, auditing, compliance world. Folks that we work with take their certifications very, very seriously, as they should. And because I've been asked in court many times by defense counsel, by prosecutors, help me to understand the differentiator between your certifications. And I explain to people, well, you can look at them in the same way that people would look at a traditional college degree. A bachelor's, a master's, a PhD. And I said, now, I'm not trying to tell you that my CHC, my CHC through HCCA is a PhD, but that is the gold standard when it comes to regulatory compliance, right? You could look at the CPC as somebody earning their bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Because to me, that was as hard, if not harder, than anything that I did, including QMB, quantitative methods of business, right? I looked at the CPMA as a master's level degree, because now I'm a certified professional medical auditor. And that's a hard certification.
Yeah.
And then I looked at, the things that I did beyond that, the CEMA, the, the CMC, the CMCO, all these. And, I tried to look at each one as another layer onto my foundational credentials, right? So for me, my foundation credential was my CPC, because that was my coding. Then I did my CPC-P, which allowed me to be proficient on the payer side. Then I did my CPMA, right, which was my auditing. And then I took it to the next level by getting the certified advanced medical auditor, the CEMA, or certified evaluation and management auditor, excuse me. And then I did the CMCO, which was the Certified Medical Compliance Officer. And then I did the CHC. And each one for me was another layer to reinforce that foundational education that I had acquired. And it's really funny because, you know, this whole compliance guy title, right?
Yeah.
You know, I've had people that are like, wow, did you really just brand yourself that? And I was like, actually, no, that was branded on me. You know, you know, over the years, you know, I've given anywhere from 75 to 100 lectures a year around the country.
Wow.
That's how many speaking events I've been asked to do.
A year.
A year.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a reason why I'm a Diamond 2 million miler on Delta.
Wow.
But you know, it was really funny. I was at the oh my God. It was the American College of Rheumatology several years ago. And I was with Aunt Tanya Chung, who is the executive director. And this physician came walking up to me and he goes, "You're that compliance guy." Swear to you, I've got 5 grandbabies, man. That's where it came from. And I said, "Yeah, I'm Sean Weiss." And he goes, "You're the compliance guy." He goes, "I sat in a class with you last year." And he goes, "You made my head hurt." And I said, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "I've never heard somebody rattle off the Code of Federal Regulations or United States, you know, code, the, you know, the USC, or statutes, or I don't know what it is. Those numbers just clicked for me, like modifiers, you know, the memory. I don't know what it is. It clicked.
Yeah.
And this became my life's work. This became my passion.
That's because where I'm at now is where you're at with your CPMA, right? I don't have the credential, but that's what I perform on the payer side, right? And I'm listening to you. I'm like, and I you know, I've talked to Sanal Patel, I've talked to Jordan, I've listened to other people with compliance, and to me, like, I'm still, this is just more selfish for me. It's like trying to figure out that pathway into compliance. And I mean, one of the goals that I've had really long time was the OIG, you know, like really up there, doing those audits and things like that. And I'm listening to, and I looked at your podcast. I'm seeing who's on your podcast. You have lawyers, you have Eric Rubenstein, former OIG, you know, and it's like, it's intriguing. So I guess a question that I have, more selfish for me, I'm sure for other people that are in the same boat, is, you know, you started out with your CPC and you got into auditing. Then from there, kind of walk us through, to me or the audience, how did you get into compliance? And you say you got to be the compliance guy, and then you say you sit now at federal level court, you know, explaining yourself as an expert. How did you get to that point? That's very intriguing to me.
You know,
maybe a long story, but you know, take your time.
No, I'll keep it short.
Yeah.
I really don't know how. You know, I want to say a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time. But you can only BS your way so far in this industry. Mm-hmm. You know, like I said, I always had a passion for healthcare. What became my obsession was the law. What became my obsession was regulatory compliance. Mm-hmm. I became fascinated with the Office of the Inspector General. Yep. And learning about strike force and learning about all of these different types of programs. And, you know, for me, I feel like I'm a career learner, because I think the biggest message that I could put out there was a message that I learned on my podcast the other day from just this incredible woman, Jean Marie Loria. Mm-hmm. Yep. She's the CEO of Advise. And what she said was she didn't let her CPC define who she was or who she was going to become.
Very nice.
And I thought about that, and it was so apropos because it was really her defining my life for me. Because I never let my CPC define who I was or who I was going to be. And it was a matriculation. It's been a lifelong journey of reading, learning, perfecting my craft, learning from mistakes. Gosh knows I've made a lot of mistakes. My wife will tell you I begin making mistakes the moment I open my eyes in the morning, and I don't stop until I start snoring in the evening. But you know what? It's being humble. It's being mature enough to recognize that you made a mistake and not trying to defend it, but owning it. I own my mistakes. I have a team of compliance and auditing professionals that I'm so blessed to work with every single day. But I've put myself out there, and you brought up the people that are on my podcasts, and I will tell you, I'm incredibly blessed, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity, to have Supreme Court accepted attorneys like Ronald Chapman II, who I've done now multiple podcasts with him. Ron Chapman Sr. is going to be one of 6 panelists on my podcast tomorrow. Brianna Santoli, who works for the oldest law firm in New Jersey, dating back to 1882. South African physicians, top surgeons here in the United States. Robert Lyles, former, director of the Department of Justice, over the fraud strike force. These are incredible people. So when people say, God, you've had wild success with your podcast, it's because of the people that I've had on. It has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, right. That's right. So let's get into the podcast then, right? So what got you started with a podcast? You just started the podcast 5 months ago, and I'm sure it has to be because of your network that you have, and just the fact of you mentioned some heavy hitters, just recently, and just having them on. I think for those that are wondering about a podcast, how do you make a podcast big? Get heavy hitters, right? Get some people that are well known, and they will help you spread, your word, right? And so you started this thing, you said 5 months ago. Walk me through that process. What got you started into podcasting?
So I have 9 partners in my firm. And I reached out to one of the partners who's the CEO. And I said, man, with the pandemic, I feel like I'm going stir crazy because I'm so used to being on airplanes, and I'm so used to being in front of people. And I was thinking about doing a podcast because I haven't been able to find anything along the lines of what I think I would do. And he's like, all right, walk me through it. And I was like, look, I've been branded this compliance guy for whatever reason. And, it's, and it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I've accepted it. And I actually, I'd be lying if I didn't say I enjoy when somebody calls me up and says, uh-oh.
That's your food.
Can we pause for 1 second?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It'll be edited out. Don't worry.
Okay. Hold tight. 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah. So, so I said to him, look, here's the deal. I'm looking for an outlet because I have all this stuff in my head. All these cases that I'm working on, all these False Claims Act cases, these healthcare fraud statute cases, START cases, anti-kickback, antitrust. I was even brought in on car accident cases to be able to talk about the medical bills. I mean, it was crazy. And I said, I just feel like I have all of this information in my head, and if I don't get some of it out, it's going to pop. And he's like, all right, so what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do a podcast. And he said, okay. He goes, but there's a million podcasts. And I said, but not in healthcare, in the world of compliance.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
There's some lawyers that are doing stuff on health law, and it's litigation stuff. And it's, unless you're an attorney or you're somebody who's like me, who has nothing to do on a Friday night except to read law books,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a lot of that stuff is like, so I said, I want to be able to occasionally do a podcast where I could talk about, for example, what is the False Claims Act? What is a KTAM case? You know, how does it, you know, how does a relayer, you know, become a relayer? You know, what is the process of unsealing, you know, a False Claims Act whistleblower case? All these different things.
Right.
And I said, but I want to do it differently. I want to bring on regulatory compliance professionals. I want to bring on auditors. I want to bring on nationally recognized people in our industry and interview them and really pick their brains and get them to talk about things that that listeners wouldn't be able to glean information from without forcing these people to kind of throw it out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, let's just, you know, he's like, look, let's just do this as an experiment. Because anybody who really knows me, you know, knows, you know, look, I try to have a good time with everything that I do. I try not to take myself too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I said, all right. So he said, I'm going to give you 6 months to figure this thing out. And I said, fair enough. So immediately out of the gate, I was like, episode 1 has to be colossal. And I had on Robert Lyles, who's former director of the department, you know, deputy director for the Department of Justice, was the first appointed director of the fraud task force, appointed by Bill Clinton. Guy was a former hospital administrator, multiple MBAs, multiple degrees, law degrees, getting his PhD. And I was also joined on that very first podcast episode by Mike Cook, who was an attorney with Medicaid and sits on the board of directors. And I was like, that's going to be epic.
Wow. Amazing.
And, you know, and it was kind of interesting because, you know, nobody from my firm was really watching. And I was like, well, heck, you know, I'm not going to put on a suit and tie, man.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna, you know, I'm going to be me.
Is this where the hat thing came about?
I am a hat guy.
Yeah.
You know, so, okay. I have a farm with my wife. You know, we have 84, 86 acres, something like that.
Wow.
And yeah, like, you know, if I'm not sitting at a desk doing this work, or if I'm not in a courtroom, I'm on my Mahindra tractor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well,
it's like Jordan Johnson. He's on a tractor too, ain't he? Doing work too.
I am. Yes, that's what we do. Like literally, I mean, you know, I'm listening to "She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy" by Kenny Chesney, and all of a sudden something will pop into my head. You know, and I'll call Jordan and I'll be like, "Hey, man," and you know, he'll answer the phone and be like, "Hey, man, what's going on? Look, man, I'm here on this tractor, man." And I was thinking, I was like, dude, just let me get this out first. But you know, anybody who knows me, I mean, this is who I am. You know, yeah, I'm forced to wear a suit and tie and all that stuff in court. And, you know, I can be prim and proper as anybody out there and, you know, put on what I need to for the jury and yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor, yes, sir.
Geez.
But the truth is that's just boring.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't make a good podcast.
No. And I figured, let me see what I can get away with because nobody's really watching
That's right.
it. So out comes the Huey hat and, you know, here's the Mark Wills, one of my favorite country Western artist singers. And all of a sudden, people were paying attention for whatever reason. I don't know. And the metrics started coming in. And just this past week, I was put on notice that there will be no more ball caps. There will be no more T-shirts when we do a live video.
Oh, man. So there you have it. That is part 1 of my interview with Sean Weiss. Sean, thank you for being on the podcast. It was so much fun. You could check him out on LinkedIn. You could also check out his podcast, The Compliance Podcast, and also check out the Coffee, Compliance, and Chuckleheads. Also, before I end this podcast, I do want to thank the National Society of Certified Healthcare Business Consultants for referring Sean to this podcast. I totally appreciate it. I want to give a shout out to Laura Nutbar for helping me out with that. I appreciate it. You could check out the National Society of Certified Healthcare Business Consultants by going to nschbc.org.
medicalcodinggeek.com